Welcome back to See, Hear, Feel. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Robert Smith. Dr. Robert Smith is a University Distinguished Professor of Medicine and Psychiatry Emeritus at Michigan State University. He is an innovator in teaching and researching patient-centered communication, as well as primary care mental health since 1985. Dr. Smith has two major textbooks being used in medical and nursing schools in the U.S. and internationally. One is called Smith's Patient-Centered Interviewing, an Evidence-Based Method, which is now in its fourth edition, and Essentials of Psychiatry in Primary Care, Behavioral Health in the Medical Setting, and that's from McGraw-Hill as well, published in 2019. He has been interviewed and quoted in the Los Angeles Times, Ladies' Home Journal, New York Times, Time, the Wall Street Journal, Newsweek, The Today Show, and Elle, as well as other places. Dr. Smith has his own blog in Psychology Today, and he is currently also writing a trade book for general audiences that is provisionally titled, Has Medicine Lost Its Mind? Welcome to Bob.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm so glad to be talking to you. Would you be able to share just a little personal anecdote about yourself, just so that listeners can get to know you a little better aside from your biography?
Oh, sure. Most people don't know that I was raised to be a professional athlete.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, my father was very interested in athletics. Medicine only came to the fore after that.
What sport did you play, or did you play multiple?
Oh, I played everything: football, basketball, baseball, track, golf, tennis.
Did you have a favorite?
Football, I would guess, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and we did fairly well.
This podcast is titled See, Hear, Feel. I like to focus on our perceptions, what we can observe, what we can listen to, what we can feel. Given your experience, one of my initial questions is, what are basic communication skills for everyone?
Pearl, in a recent book, Uncaring, articulated the culture of medicine. It's medicine's culture that you are basically working too hard and forced with too many hours a day. And the society that I was raised in, especially as a man, it is absolutely forbidden to talk about your feelings. So it's not just medical culture, it's the culture more broadly that wants to dismiss our own feelings and emotions, which, on the other hand, are the very centerpiece of what keeps society together. It's how you and I and everybody else interact. It's through emotional lives. Paradoxically, society in general, medicine in particular, suppress them.
How did you learn emotional intelligence and gaining awareness of your own feelings, having not grown up that way?
It's important to address your emotions. It helps to make it okay to talk about them. Practicing them, just doing it. The first time you express an emotion to somebody else, and you realize the roof doesn't fall in. You're still there. Everybody's still there. Nobody's laughing at you. But these are basic interpersonal skills that revolve around emotions. And this is how society interacts. Traditionally, doctors have just used so-called closed-ended skills, which means just asking questions one after the other. How old are you? What kind of work do you do? Where are the symptoms? Do you have pain in the head? And so on and so forth. Those are closed-ended skills, and they don't yield much information about the person. We advocate for basic skills. One of them is just being silent, pausing, giving the person an opportunity to talk. But probably more important are these focusing, open-ended skills. For example, you might say, tell me more about losing your job. Focusing skills focus the direction toward the physical problem or toward the psychological dimensions. And both are important. This is how one generates a story unique to the person, not only physically, but personally. But often, we don't yet have the emotion that goes with the story. We have to ask about it. And the second key skill is emotion-seeking skills. You might say, so how does that make you feel, losing your job? And there are any number of ways to ask that, but that's basically what you're trying to get at. Now, sometimes people will say something, oh, I don't have any feeling. We were brought up in my family not to discuss that. And so you have to pursue it a little bit more. And you might say something like, I've seen other people out of work, they felt pretty upset about it. You can kind of plant it out there. And when you plant it out there, use a neutral term. People often wonder why all this focus on emotion. It's the pinnacle of the interview. It is the essence of the interview and the doctor-patient relationship. And as many people have shown, understanding others' emotions is essential to interaction in a broad society. And these are vital elements that are often ignored. Now, having gotten emotion, the third skill you go to are the empathic skills. And we have devised a mnemonic for this called NURSE, N-U-R-S. And what that means is that, let us just say now that our person with chest pain lost their job said, when I ask about emotion, said, it makes me feel down and upset. And you would hear that for a while, and you'd start saying, well, say more about being down and upset. And they would tell you, maybe about their job and all the other aspects of that. And once you've heard enough of it to understand what they're talking about, you use the NURSE skills. That's naming, understanding, respecting, supporting. Everybody always tells us, be empathic, but nobody ever tells you how. This is how. You name it, you understand it, you respect it, and support it. And these skills that we're talking about, Christine, apply in everyday interactions. You can use them with your spouse, with your kids, with the bank teller, with somebody you run into on the street. And so they are generally applicable. And in medical instances, people always worry, wow, I'm going to open a can of worms. I may get a bad story that I can't do anything about to help, so I shouldn't unearth it. And what I urge people to understand is that you don't have to fix it. It is helpful to that person simply to hear you be empathic with them. People don't expect you to solve their problem, but they want to feel supported and accepted by you. And you do that by using these NURSE skills. And you don't typically use all four of them at once. Sprinkle them throughout the interaction. It might go something like, oh, so you were feeling pretty down about that. I can understand. 30, 40 seconds later, you might say, oh, that was a tough time for you. That's a respect statement, but good for telling me about it. Those are both respect statements. 20 seconds later, let's work on that together. You're variously using all of these different skills throughout the interview. And the essence of the interview is communication and doctor-patient relationship. Identifying emotion, asking about it, and then nursing it is where the communication maximizes and where the doctor-patient relationship is established. It's just basically interpersonal skills. They have nothing to do with medicine. We have simply systematized them for teaching it in medicine. And the mnemonic NURSE is easily remembered, N-U-R-S. That's not really a word. Everybody wants to fill in the word and put an E in it. And who's more empathic than the nurse? So it's an easy way to remember that.
There's a paper related to the Dunning-Kruger effect. The Dunning-Kruger effect being that we tend to overrate ourselves in a given skill. When you take a poll of, say, 100 people, most people will rate themselves on any skill at the 60 to 70% range in general.
Yeah.
Obviously, those 100 people, not everyone is going to be above average, meaning that even say for driving, I might think that I'm above average, but really I'm average or I'm worse than average. There's a paper showing that Dunning-Kruger effect for communication between doctors and patients, showing that doctors rate themselves at 70%. Like, I'm a good communicator.
Yeah.
And really patients rate them at about 20%. So I'm a doctor and maybe I'm really 20% in terms of how good my communication is, but I would rate myself at 70%. So why do you think that doctors overrate ourselves?
That's a good question. Common observation is when people first come into an interviewing course, particularly if it's a required course, some people will really be interested in it, but others will say, why am I here? I don't want to do this touchy-feely stuff. I know how to communicate already. And part of it is the simple fact that all of us have been communicating all our lives. And they're talking, communicating every day. And from their perspective, it works. It's what they do. We often see what we'll call reluctant learners, or people that are not particularly interested in this. So how do you teach them? What you do is you work with them to establish a relationship and say, yeah, it sounds frustrating for you to have me talking about this. I can understand that. You are nursing them and carrying them out and developing a relationship. I did a workshop once that illustrated this with practicing doctors. We got started, and you could tell they were unhappy. What the people that organized it hadn't told us is that they were all forced to be there because they'd had patient complaints. So we did not start teaching them patient-centered skills. We spent the entire morning hearing out their beefs and concerns about why they were there, how difficult their job was. They had too many patients. We heard them out open-endedly, elicited their emotion, and nursed. By the afternoon, they were just learning these patient-centered skills then. And one of them said to me, you used the same skills with us this morning that you're teaching us to use with patients, didn't you?
Especially with the COVID-19 pandemic and short staffing across many hospital systems and burnout and the Great Resignation and just the many tragedies that the world has continued to be dealing with even beyond the COVID-19 pandemic, different natural disasters, the war in Ukraine. One of the issues is that doctors aren't being heard themselves. And so it's hard for doctors to listen to patients when you feel as a doctor, the system isn't treating you as a human being either with real emotions and needs.
Exactly.
And is there anything that we can do about that?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. Many people view doctors as real uptight and close to the belt and not wanting to express feelings. As you can guess, as part of teaching patient-centered interviewing, we teach what we call self-awareness, personal awareness. The first thing is, how do you feel about the interaction? What was your reaction to it? You develop their personal story and, of course, are empathic with it. Having addressed their personal awareness, they are more able to go in and actually do these patient-centered skills. To teach these counterintuitive skills, you have to relate first to the learner using, in fact, the same skills. And we did a study on this once. We demonstrated that when residents could learn and participate in self-awareness like this, they could recognize emotion and be responsive to it, that the interviewing results were actually better. Back to your question about all of the trauma doctors experience in this day and age and burnout, people have to understand doctors, what their emotions are and how bad they feel, and have to be responsive to that. Doctors are not automatons. If you give them a chance, they're quite open to talking about their feelings. It's just that they've gone through medical school and pre-medical stuff where this was not only not done, it was forbidden. It was off base. You didn't talk about these things. You didn't talk about how bad it was to get no sleep for 2 nights in a row. And it's a real revolution in medicine to get doctors to start talking about their own feelings. And the good news in that is when they're able to do it, they interact in turn better with patients and are themselves more empathic.
Absolutely. Many of the things you say, I think, are definitely true for me. I found medical training to be, in reflection, actually somewhat dehumanizing. It was only once I had kids and I started reading books about emotional intelligence and thinking fast and slow, thinking about how we think, that I realized that I had a very poor education in knowing how I feel, being even able to name how I feel.
Yeah.
I think that nurse mnemonic name, understand, respect, and support, for me, at least, definitely did start with myself. And the more I can do it with myself, the more I do have
Yeah.
space, grace, and empathy to extend that same type of nurse mnemonic to someone else.
Yeah, it's important to nurse yourself, isn't it?
I think
Yeah.
very much so.
Yeah.
Do you have any final thoughts?
Oh, I'm glad to see you doing this. And you've written so eloquently about it in your book. It's really very important. This broader idea of emotion as central to not just medicine, but to all society. This broader idea is one that the public, these cultures, societal culture and medical culture, have not quite yet embraced, and it's important. Emotional awareness, emotional intelligence is so important.
Thank you for spending the time with me.
Oh, my pleasure.